Tonight, we are going to spend some time together with teachings that have been passed down for thousands of years. These are teachings about what we chase in life, what we hold on to, and what happens when we learn to let go. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. The Buddha once said that contentment is the greatest wealth. It is such a simple phrase, but most of us spend our lives chasing something else. We work and save and build and buy. And still, at the end of the day, a quiet question keeps coming back. Is this enough? Am I enough? Tonight is about that question. Not to answer it with more effort, but to discover that the answer may already be here. The Buddhist tradition has a phrase for it. They called it the peace of wanting nothing. Not the poverty of having nothing, but the freedom of needing nothing more than what this moment already holds. So settle in, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk. Let us begin. In the old Buddhist scriptures, there is a teaching the Buddha offered about desire. He did not say that wanting, in itself, was the enemy. What he said was more precise and far more compassionate than that. He said that craving, the particular kind of wanting that grips and refuses to let go, the wanting that whispers, "You are not whole until you have something you do not yet possess," that is where suffering takes root. Not in desire itself, but in desire that has lost its way. This is a distinction worth sitting with for a while because it changes everything. It means we do not have to become people who want nothing at all. We do not have to hollow ourselves out and live without feeling or direction. What we are invited to do is something gentler and, in many ways, more difficult. We are invited to look clearly at what we want and to ask, with real honesty, whether what we are chasing is truly what we need. The Buddha called this kind of honest seeing right understanding. It is the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path, the ancient road he laid out for those who wished to find peace. And it begins not with discipline, not with meditation, not with grand spiritual effort, but simply with seeing things as they are. So let us begin there tonight, with a simple question that has been asked for thousands of years, in villages and monasteries, by kings and by farmers standing barefoot in the rain. How much do you really need to be happy? Let us explore another story, this one set along an ancient coastline, in a time when trade ships sailed from port to port carrying spices and silk and ambitions of every kind. A merchant was traveling along the coast with his small caravan when they stopped to rest near a fishing village. It was midday. The sun was high and white, and the sea stretched out flat and silver to the horizon. The boats had been pulled up on the sand, their hulls still wet, and nets were spread on rocks to dry in the heat. The air smelled of salt and wood smoke and the faintest trace of jasmine from somewhere behind the huts. Beneath a broad tree near the water's edge, a fisherman sat cross-legged, mending a net with slow, practiced hands. He was humming something under his breath, some old song that had no particular beginning or end. The merchant approached him. He was a well-dressed man with rings on his fingers and a calculating look in his eyes, the look of someone who sees every scene as an opportunity. "Good afternoon," he said. "The fish must not be biting today." The fisherman looked up. His face was brown from the sun, and his expression was open and untroubled, the kind of face that has nothing to hide and nothing to prove. "Oh, I have already been out this morning," he said. caught enough for my family and a bit extra for my neighbor. Her husband has been unwell. We will all eat well tonight." The merchant frowned slightly. "But it is barely past noon. The day is young. You could go out again, catch more. And what would I do with more?" The merchant sat down beside him, warming to the subject. He was a man who loved strategy, who took pleasure in the architecture of plans. "Well," he said, settling himself on the sand, "if you caught more fish, you could sell the extra at the market in the next town. After a season or two, you could save enough to buy a second boat. Then you could hire a boy from the village to fish for you. Within a few years, you might have a whole fleet. You could set up a trading post. You could have agents in 3 ports." The fisherman listened with a pleasant, patient expression, the way one listens to a child describing an elaborate dream. "And then?" the fisherman asked. "Then," said the merchant, leaning forward with the excitement of a man who can see the destination clearly, "you would not have to fish at all. You could sit by the sea every day, rest in the shade, mend your nets for pleasure, not out of necessity. Spend your mornings with your family. You would be free." The fisherman smiled. It was a warm smile, not unkind, not mocking. Just the quiet, easy smile of a man who has already arrived at the place someone else is still running toward. "My friend," he said gently, "what do you think I am doing right now?" The merchant opened his mouth to reply, and then closed it again. He looked at the fisherman. He looked at the sea. He looked at his own hands, heavy with rings, and for a moment something shifted in his expression. It was not quite understanding, not yet. But it was the beginning of a question he had never thought to ask himself. He sat there for a long time. The fisherman returned to his net, humming that same tuneless song. Neither of them spoke. The waves came in and pulled back. The leaves of the tree moved gently overhead, and something in the merchant's chest, something that had been tightly wound for a very long time, began, just slightly, to loosen. He did not know it yet, but he would remember this afternoon for the rest of his life. Not the ports he visited, not the deals he closed, not the silk or the spice. This, the shade of a tree, the sound of waves, and a man who already had everything he needed. There is a teaching in the Zen tradition that puts this even more simply. A wealthy patron once traveled a great distance to visit a monastery high in the mountains. He had heard stories of the abbot's wisdom, of how monks and scholars came from distant provinces to sit with him, and he wanted to see for himself what kind of man could inspire such devotion. The climb was long. The patron arrived tired and dusty, and a young monk led him through the monastery grounds, past the meditation hall, past the kitchen garden, past a grove of bamboo swaying in the wind. Finally, they came to the abbot's room. The patron stepped inside and stopped. He looked around slowly, disbelief gathering on his face. There was a mat on the floor, a single cushion, flattened by years of use, a wooden bowl, a few old books, their covers soft with age, a small window that looked out over the valley below. Nothing else. No furniture, no decoration, no sign of status or comfort. "Where is your furniture?" the patron asked. The abbot, who had been sitting quietly by the window, looked at him with kind, unhurried eyes. "Where is yours?" he said. The patron blinked. "But I am only passing through." The abbot nodded slowly, a faint smile at the corners of his mouth. "So am I," he said. The patron stood there for a long moment, not speaking. Something in those 3 words had landed in a place deeper than argument. He looked again at the small room, and this time he did not see emptiness. He saw a man who had set down every unnecessary thing and found, beneath it all, something solid. Something that did not need walls or furniture or the approval of the world to hold it up. This is not a story about poverty. The abbot was not deprived. He was free. He had arrived at something that many of us spend decades looking for without recognizing it. That we are all passing through. That the things we accumulate, the homes we fill, the wardrobes we stuff full, these do not travel with us. They are borrowed comforts. And while there is nothing wrong with comfort, there is a quiet kind of freedom in knowing we do not need it to be at peace. The Buddha spoke of this often. He taught that the root of suffering is not pleasure itself, but our clinging to it. Not enjoyment, but the desperate grip. The way we hold on to what we have as though it could save us, and reach for what we do not have as though it could complete us. When we cling, we suffer. When we hold things gently, knowing they are temporary, knowing that we too are temporary, we can enjoy them fully and let them go when the time comes. This is not coldness. It is the deepest kind of warmth. There is a story about a young monk who, early in his years of wandering, came to a small village in a remote valley. It was a long walk from the nearest town, and the nearest town itself was a long walk from anywhere. The path narrowed as it climbed through forest and crossed shallow streams, and by the time the monk arrived, the afternoon light was soft and golden, filtering through the canopy in long, warm columns. The village sat in a wide clearing surrounded by green hills. The homes were simple, raised on wooden stilts with thatched roofs that sloped gently toward the earth. The villagers grew rice. They fished in the river when the rains came and the water rose high enough to fill the old channels between the paddies. They built their homes with whatever the forest provided, and they traded among themselves, exchanging labor and food and kindness in a way that had no name but worked all the same. There was no marketplace, no currency changing hands. People shared what they had, and what they had was not much. The monk had come from a world of learning, from a city where scholars debated fine points of philosophy and merchants called out prices from their stalls, and the streets were always moving with people who seemed to have somewhere urgent to be. And so when he first arrived in this valley, barefoot and carrying only his bowl, he expected to find hardship. He expected thin faces and heavy silence and the kind of weariness that poverty leaves in the body. What he found instead surprised him. He noticed, first, the sound, laughter. Children chasing one another between the houses, shrieking with delight, their bare feet slapping the packed earth. A woman singing as she carried water from the well, her voice rising and falling with the easy rhythm of someone who had nowhere particular to rush to. An old man sitting on the raised platform of his home, eyes half closed, smiling at nothing in particular, his dog sleeping beside him in the warmth of the afternoon. Somewhere behind the houses, a rooster called out, and no one paid it any attention because it called out every afternoon and no one had ever needed to answer. The monk stayed in that village for several weeks. He observed the families. He sat with them in the evenings as the fireflies gathered above the rice paddies and the air cooled and the stars appeared one by one over the ridge of the mountains. And during those weeks, he began to notice something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Every household in the village kept a water buffalo. The buffalo plowed the fields. Its dung fertilized the earth. It pulled the carts when heavy loads needed moving. A buffalo was not a luxury. It was the heart of the household, as essential as the roof overhead. And what the monk noticed was this. The farmer who had one water buffalo and was content with one water buffalo was almost always the one who seemed at ease. He woke with the sun and worked his fields through the cool hours of the morning, and by the time the heat rose, his tasks were done. He was the one who had time to sit by the river in the late afternoon, watching the light change on the water. He was the one whose children gathered around him after the evening meal, leaning against his shoulders as he told old stories about spirits in the forest and fish that could talk. He was the one who laughed easily, who offered rice to travelers without hesitation, who slept deeply and rose without dread. His life was simple, and somewhere inside himself, he seemed to know it was enough. But the farmer who had one water buffalo and wanted two, that was a different man entirely. He was not suffering from poverty. He had everything his neighbor had: the same rice, the same roof, the same river and sky, the same warm evenings and the same birdsong at dawn. But something in him was restless. You could see it in the way he moved, always a little hurried, always glancing sideways. He was the one who stayed in his fields past the hottest part of the day, not because the work required it, but because rest felt like falling behind. He was always calculating, always measuring what he had against what his neighbor had, or against what a farmer in the next village had, or against some idea of plenty that existed only in his mind. His body was in the village, but his thoughts were somewhere else, reaching for a second buffalo that did not yet exist. And because of that constant reaching, he could never quite feel the warmth of what was already in his hands. The monk sat with this observation for many days. He watched the two men go about their lives, and the truth of it settled into him slowly, the way rain settles into the earth. It was not dramatic. It was not a flash of insight. It was more like recognizing something he had always known but never had the words for. Happiness was not a matter of how much a person had. It was a matter of how much a person wanted. This insight is not just a piece of ancient wisdom. It is something the Buddhist tradition returns to again and again because it sits at the very heart of the second noble truth. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from tanha, a word often translated as craving or thirst. It is the ache of always reaching for the next thing. The feeling that this, right here, is not quite enough. But notice what the Buddha did not say. He did not say that all desire is wrong. He did not say we must live without purpose or preference. What he pointed to was a specific kind of desire, the kind that is never satisfied, the kind that drinks and drinks and never stops being thirsty. That is tanha. That is the craving that causes pain. There is another kind of wanting, what the tradition calls chanda, which is closer to wholesome intention. The desire to be kind, the desire to understand, the desire to ease someone's suffering or to grow in wisdom. These are desires too, but they are not driven by the feeling that something is missing. They arise from fullness, not from lack. So the question is never whether we should want things. The question is, what are we wanting, and where is that wanting leading us? Are we reaching for something that will bring us closer to peace? Or are we chasing something that promises satisfaction but never quite delivers? The old teachers had a phrase for this second kind of craving. They called it unfaithful, because it makes grand promises and never keeps them. It is like a guest who comes to your door swearing loyalty and then disappears the moment you need them most. Let us return to the question we began with. How much do we really need to be happy? The Buddhist tradition answers this question not with a number, but with a shift in perspective. The Pali word for contentment is santutti, and it appears again and again in the Buddha's teachings. He praised it as a kind of wealth that cannot be stolen, cannot be lost in a fire, cannot be diminished by misfortune or changing times. Contentment is the greatest wealth, he said. Not silver, not land, not reputation. Contentment. And unlike the wealth the world offers, it does not depend on circumstances. It depends only on the quality of our attention, on whether we are looking at what is missing or whether we are looking at what is here. This is not a teaching about deprivation. It is not a command to want less or to feel guilty for what we have. The Buddha himself taught the value of right livelihood, of honest and meaningful work that contributes to the well-being of others. He was not asking anyone to abandon the world. He was asking something simpler and, in its own way, more radical. He was asking us to stop letting the world abandon us to an endless chase, to step off the path of more, just long enough to notice that we are already standing on solid ground. Because there is a difference between building a life and racing through one. There is a difference between earning what we need and being consumed by what we want. And the space between those two things, the space between enough and never enough, that is where contentment lives. It has always been there. We simply forget to look. The farmer with one buffalo knew this. Not because he was wise in any scholarly way, not because he had read the suttas or sat at the feet of a great teacher. He knew it the way the body knows how to breathe. He had enough. And because he knew he had enough, he was free. This is the theme we will return to throughout our journey tonight. The peace of wanting nothing. Not as a philosophy to debate, but as a feeling to recognize. That quiet settling in the chest when, even for a moment, the reaching stops and something deeper comes to rest. We have all tasted it. A still morning with nowhere to be. A conversation with someone we love where the words finally run out and the silence that follows is not empty but full. The moment just after a long exhale, when the body releases something it did not know it was holding. A child asleep in our arms, breathing softly, needing nothing from us but our presence. In the Zen tradition, they sometimes call this the mind of enough. It is not a thought. It is not a decision. It is a quality of presence, like the stillness of a lake that has stopped being stirred. It was always there, beneath the wind and the waves. We simply had to stop adding to the disturbance long enough to let the water clear. These moments of contentment come and go. We cannot hold on to them, and the old teachers would say we should not try. But we can begin to notice them. We can begin to trust them. And in that noticing, in that small, quiet trust, we begin to understand that peace was never far away. It was never something we had to earn or deserve or travel a great distance to find. The peace of wanting nothing is not something we need to acquire. It is something we uncover gently by setting down what we have been carrying. And so, as we move forward tonight, we carry this with us. The image of a farmer standing in a green valley at the end of the day, his buffalo resting beside him, the sky wide and soft above. He has nothing the world would call remarkable. And yet, in the old language of the Dharma, he is wealthy beyond measure. He is free, and he is at peace. Take a breath here, if you like. There is no hurry. Whenever you are ready, we will continue together. There was once a man who lived a quiet, contented life. He was not wealthy, but he had what he needed. A modest home near the edge of a market town, close enough to hear the morning bustle from his doorstep, but tucked back enough to enjoy the shade of an old tree that grew in his small courtyard. He was a craftsman of some kind, someone who worked with his hands, and his days had a rhythm to them that he never thought to question. He rose early. He worked steadily. In the evenings, he sat outside with a few close friends, the kind who would lean against the wall and talk about nothing in particular, and that nothing felt like everything. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change color. He did not know it at the time, but he was, by most honest measures, happy. Then one day, through no effort of his own, a great fortune fell into his lap. Perhaps an inheritance from a distant relative he had never met. Perhaps a stroke of extraordinary luck in a venture he had almost forgotten about. The details do not matter as much as what happened next. At first, it was wonderful. He could buy things he had only admired from a distance. He ate at finer tables. He moved to a larger home in a more fashionable part of the city, with tiled floors and a garden enclosed by high walls. People he barely knew began to seek him out, smiling broadly, congratulating him, offering friendship with both hands open and both eyes appraising. But something began to shift. It happened slowly, the way a color fades in cloth left too long in the sun. You do not notice it day by day. But one morning you look, and what was once vivid has become pale, and you cannot say exactly when it changed. His old friends started to feel distant. Some of them asked for loans, awkwardly, in the middle of conversations that used to be easy. He did not mind helping, but after a while, he could not tell whether people were sitting with him because they enjoyed his company or because they enjoyed his money. That uncertainty crept into every relationship like damp into the walls of a house. He began to guard himself. He began to calculate. The openness that had once made him such good company gave way to a quiet suspicion, and he did not like the man he was becoming, but he did not know how to stop it. His new home was beautiful, but it was large enough to echo. He had rooms he never entered. He hired people to maintain what he could not maintain himself, and then he worried about whether they were trustworthy. He lay awake at night thinking about things he had never thought about before, things like security and risk and what might go wrong. Within a few years, the man who had once been easy and open and generous had become guarded and anxious. He had more than he had ever dreamed of, and yet the feeling he woke up with each morning was not gratitude. It was dread, a low, constant hum of worry about losing what he now had. Because that is one of the quiet truths about accumulation that no one mentions on the way up. The more you have, the more you have to protect. And the more you protect, the less you can rest. He sometimes thought about his old life. The modest house, the tree in the courtyard, those evenings with friends where there was nothing to discuss but the shape of the clouds and whether the figs would ripen early this year. He could not understand how those simple hours had held more warmth than all the banquets and fine rooms and new companions that his fortune had brought. But they had. He knew it. And knowing it only made his present life feel emptier. This is what craving does when it gets what it asks for. It does not settle down. It rearranges. It finds new things to want, new threats to guard against, new gaps to fill. The promise was that enough money would bring peace. The reality was that enough money brought a louder, more elaborate form of restlessness. This is not a rare story. Versions of it have been told across centuries and cultures because the pattern repeats itself with an almost stubborn regularity. The Buddhist tradition has a name for this pattern. It is called the wheel of craving. We reach for something, believing it will satisfy us. We get it, and for a moment, perhaps, there is pleasure. But then the pleasure fades, and in its place comes a new worry, a new desire, a new reaching. The wheel turns and turns, and we turn with it, never arriving at the rest we thought the next thing would bring. The Buddha described this with great clarity in a teaching called the Fire Sermon, one of his most well-known discourses. He said that the untrained mind is burning with craving, burning with aversion, burning with confusion. Not because the world is on fire, but because we keep adding fuel. Every time we chase something we do not need, we add another log. Every time we convince ourselves that this next thing will finally be enough, we fan the flames a little higher. And because the fuel is endless, because there is always something more to want, the fire never runs out on its own. But he also said something hopeful, something that is easy to miss if you are only listening for the warnings. He said that when we stop adding fuel, the fire goes out by itself. We do not have to fight it. We do not have to wrestle it to the ground or smother it with willpower. We simply stop feeding it. We step back and we watch, and the flames begin to settle. And what remains, when the last of the heat fades, is cool. It is clear. It is what the mind feels like when it is no longer at war with itself. The Pali word for this cooling is nibbana. It is often translated as blowing out, as in the gentle extinguishing of a candle. Not a violent ending, but a quiet release. A returning to the stillness that was always there beneath the burning. An ancient philosopher, writing in a land far from where the Buddha taught but in roughly the same era, told a remarkable parable about this same human tendency. He believed, as many in his time did, that the soul lives more than once, and so he imagined a scene that has stayed vivid across the centuries. He asked his readers to picture a vast, open meadow at the edge of the world. In this meadow, souls gathered between their lives. They had finished one journey and were about to begin another. And before them, spread out in long rows, were the lives they could choose. Each life lay waiting, complete, with all its pleasures and all its difficulties already woven in, though the soul choosing could only see the surface. Some of the lives shone like polished bronze. These were the lives of kings and conquerors, heavy with power and draped in fine robes. Some glittered with the promise of fame, surrounded by admiring crowds. Some sat atop mountains of gold, vast estates, fleets of ships, cellars of wine. These were the lives that caught the eye immediately. They seemed to glow. And then, off to one side, folded neatly in a corner where few bothered to look, were the modest lives. A farmer with a small plot of land. A potter with a workshop and a steady hand. A woman who kept a garden and raised her children near the sea. No glory. No mention in any history. Just days that followed days, with enough to eat and someone to share the evening with. The philosopher watched how the souls chose, and what he saw grieved him. Those who had suffered in their previous lives, those who had tasted the bitterness that wealth and power can bring, moved slowly through the choices. They picked up the golden lives, turned them over carefully, felt their weight, and set them back down. They were not dazzled. They knew something about the loneliness of palaces and the heaviness of crowns. And so, quietly, without fanfare, they chose the modest lives, the potter's workshop, the garden by the sea. But those who had been comfortable, those who had never looked closely at the cost of luxury, rushed forward. They grabbed the glittering lives first, elbowing past one another, certain they were being clever. They chose quickly, hungrily, believing that to have more is always to be more. And the philosopher noted, with a gentle sadness, that the reader already knows how this ends. The ones who seize the golden lives will spend their years weighed down by exactly the things they thought would lift them up. And the ones who chose the quiet lives, the unremarkable ones, will walk through their days with a lightness the others will spend fortunes trying to buy and never quite find. It is a parable about wisdom, about the kind of knowing that comes only from paying close attention to what actually makes a life good. And it echoes, almost perfectly, something the Buddha taught his own students. He called it the middle way, not the path of luxury and not the path of deprivation, but the path that runs between them, where there is enough to live with dignity and ease, and not so much that the weight of it pulls you under. Those who study happiness in the modern world have found something that would not have surprised the Buddha or the ancient philosopher at all. When researchers looked at large groups of people and measured their well-being against their income, the results drew a clear and consistent picture. Up to a certain point, a modest and sufficient income, more money does improve a person's life. It allows for shelter and food and medicine and the small comforts that make daily existence gentler. But beyond that point, something unexpected happens. Happiness does not continue to rise. In many cases, it begins to fall. The people who were most content, most stable in their relationships, most at ease in their own skin, were not the wealthiest. They were the ones who had enough. Enough to meet their needs, enough to share a little, and not so much that their lives became a full-time project of maintenance and worry. The Buddhist middle way, it turns out, is not only a spiritual teaching. It is, in a very practical sense, how happiness works. There is a point of sufficiency, a place where you have what you need and can breathe freely. Below it, life is hard. Above it, life becomes complicated in ways that are difficult to see from below. And the strange thing is that many people pass right through that point of sufficiency without noticing. They are so focused on the next milestone, the next purchase, the next rung on the ladder, that they do not feel the moment when enough becomes enough. They keep climbing, and the view, strangely, does not improve. The air just gets thinner. There is a story in the Buddhist tradition about a king who came to visit the Buddha in a forest grove. This king was powerful and wealthy, ruler of a prosperous land, and he arrived with an entourage of soldiers and advisors and attendants. The grove was quiet. The monks sat in meditation under the trees. The contrast must have been striking, all that worldly power flowing into a place of such deep simplicity. The king found the Buddha sitting beneath a tree, his robes plain, his expression calm. And the king, who was not an unkind man but who was used to measuring the world in terms of power and possessions, asked a question that must have seemed perfectly reasonable to him. How can you be happy with so little? The Buddha looked at the king with great warmth. He was not offended. He was not condescending. He simply asked a question in return. How can you be happy when you are always wanting more? The king paused. He looked back at his entourage, The guards standing at attention, the advisors whispering among themselves, the endless machinery of his kingdom that followed him even into the forest. And for a moment, just a moment, something in his face softened. A kind of recognition, not of something new, but of something he had known for a long time and pushed aside because it was inconvenient. The Buddha continued gently. A king who is always wanting more is poorer than the monk who wants for nothing. Not because the monk has what the king has, but because the monk does not need it. This is not a story about kings and monks. It is a story about each of us, about the quiet arithmetic we do every day, adding up what we have and subtracting what we still want, and always arriving at a deficit. The Buddhist teaching asks us, with great kindness, to look at that equation, to notice that the deficit is not in our circumstances. It is in the calculation itself. There is a small but illuminating exchange in the Buddhist texts where a student asks the Buddha a direct question. What is the greatest gain? The Buddha's answer is striking in its simplicity. He does not say wisdom, though he valued it deeply. He does not say enlightenment, though it was the summit of his teaching. He says, health is the greatest gift. Contentment is the greatest wealth. A trusted friend is the best relative. Nibbana is the greatest happiness. Contentment is the greatest wealth. Not gold, not land, not influence. Contentment. The quiet, uncomplicated feeling of having enough. This is worth pausing on because our world works very hard to convince us of the opposite. We are surrounded by voices telling us that we do not have enough, that we are not enough, that the next purchase or achievement or experience will finally close the gap inside us. And these voices are persuasive. They have to be, because they are selling something, and what they are selling depends on our dissatisfaction. If we were content, we would stop buying. If we knew we had enough, the entire machinery of wanting would grind to a halt. But the Buddha was not in the business of selling anything. He had nothing to gain from our craving or our contentment. And so when he says that contentment is the greatest wealth, we can hear it clearly, without the static of someone else's agenda. It is an observation, not an advertisement. A truth, not a transaction. And yet, knowing this and living it are different things. We can nod along with the teaching, agree with the philosopher, read the research, and still go home and feel the pull. Still compare what we have to what someone else has. Still feel that familiar tug when we see something shining and new. This is not a failure. It is simply what it feels like to be human in a world that has become very skilled at making us want. The Buddhist path does not ask us to be free of these feelings overnight. It asks something more forgiving than that. It asks us to notice, to catch ourselves in the act of reaching and to pause, just for a breath, and ask, with curiosity rather than judgment, what am I reaching for? And will it truly bring me closer to peace? Or is this one of those unfaithful promises that looks beautiful from a distance, but has nothing to offer once it is in my hands? There is a Zen teaching about a man who spent years searching for a precious jewel. He traveled across mountains and rivers. He bargained with merchants and followed rumors through foreign cities. He spent everything he had on the search. And then one day, exhausted and broken, he sat down by the road and looked down at his own coat. And there, sewn into the lining, right over his heart, was the jewel. It had been with him the entire time. This is the teaching of contentment in its simplest form. The peace of wanting nothing is not something we need to travel far to find. It is not waiting at the end of some long effort. It is here, right now, sewn into the fabric of this ordinary moment. The only reason we do not feel it is that we have been looking everywhere else. Sometimes the answer is yes, we do need something, and the wanting is clean and honest and points us in a good direction. But more often than we might expect, if we sit with the question for just a little while, the reaching loosens on its own. Not because we forced it, not because we shamed ourselves out of it, but because unfaithful cravings depend on us not paying attention. They need us to be half asleep at the wheel. And the simple act of waking up, of looking clearly at what we are chasing and why, is often enough to let them go. In the Dhammapada, one of the most beloved collections of the Buddha's sayings, there is a verse that goes, "There is no fire like passion, no loss like anger, no pain like this body, no happiness like peace." No happiness like peace, not like pleasure, not like achievement, not like the thrill of getting what we wanted. Peace, the quiet kind, the kind that does not need anything added to it. We are still early in our journey tonight, and there is much more to explore together. But if anything stays with you from this chapter, let it be this. The fortune we think we are chasing is already here. It has always been here. We just have to stop running long enough to notice. Rest here for a moment, if you like. There is no rush. We will go on together whenever you are ready. What is truly worth having? It is a question that sounds simple enough, but when we sit with it honestly, it begins to pull apart everything we thought we knew about value. We know the price of things. We know what the market says a house is worth, what a salary should be, how much a fine meal costs. But worth is something different. Worth is what remains when the price tag has been forgotten, when the thing itself has worn out or been given away or lost. Worth is the part that stays. In Zen Buddhism, there is a tradition of asking questions that cannot be answered with the thinking mind alone. These questions, called koans, are not puzzles to be solved, but doorways to be walked through. And one of the most fundamental koans, asked in 100 different ways across the centuries, comes down to this. What do you truly value? Not what you say you value, not what you have been told to value, but what, in the quiet of your own heart, do you reach for when everything else falls away? Tonight, let us explore a story about a man who had to learn, the hard way and then the gentle way, what was truly worth reaching for. In an old monastery, tucked into the hills above a river valley, the monks lived according to a pattern that had not changed in generations. They rose before dawn. They meditated in the cool hours of early morning. They ate one simple meal together, sitting in silence. They tended their gardens, swept their paths, mended what needed mending. And in the evenings, they studied the Dhamma by lamplight, the teachings of the Buddha passed down through centuries of careful hands. The monastery was not wealthy. A few statues in the shrine room, worn smooth by years of incense. A small donation box near the entrance, where visitors sometimes left coins. The buildings themselves were old and modest, wood and stone, and the roofs leaked in heavy rains. But the monks did not seem to mind. They patched what they could and let the rest be. One night, Long after the lamps had been put out and the monastery had settled into its deep, familiar silence, the abbot was woken by a sound. It was faint at first. A scraping, a shuffling, the careful movement of someone trying very hard not to be heard. Then a muffled thud, as if something had been bumped in the dark. The abbot lay still for a moment, listening. The monastery was full of small sounds at night. Mice in the walls, a branch tapping a window, the creak of old wood expanding in the cool air. But this was different. This had intention behind it. He rose from his mat, wrapped his robe around his shoulders, and walked barefoot down the stone corridor toward the shrine room. The stones were cold under his feet. The monastery was silent except for the distant sound of the river below the hillside. The moon was high enough to cast pale light through the open windows, and in that light, as the abbot reached the doorway of the shrine room, he could see a figure crouched beside the donation box, working at the lid with a piece of bent metal. The man was thin. Even in the half-dark, you could see it. The sharp angle of his shoulders through his torn shirt. The hollows in his cheeks. His hands were shaking, whether from cold or from nerves or from hunger, it was hard to tell. He had not eaten in some time. That much was clear from the desperate, clumsy way he worked at the lid, as if this small box of coins were the most important thing in the world. When the man heard the abbot's footsteps on the stone floor, he spun around and pressed himself against the wall. His eyes were wide, not angry, frightened. The eyes of an animal that has been cornered and does not know what will happen next. "Stay back," he said. His voice cracked. "Just let me take what is in the box and I will go. I do not want trouble." The abbot stood very still in the doorway. He did not call out to the other monks. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the man, and what he saw was not a criminal. What he saw was a person in pain, a hungry, frightened person who had run out of roads and run out of choices and ended up here, in the middle of the night, in a place where he did not belong, doing something he probably wished he did not have to do. After a long, quiet moment, the abbot reached into the folds of his robe and held out a small iron key. "Here," he said softly. "This will save you the trouble." The man stared at him. He did not move. "The box is old," the abbot continued, in the same calm, unhurried voice he might have used to explain something to a child. "The lock is stubborn. You will only hurt your hands trying to force it. Please, take the key." Slowly, not understanding, the man reached out and took it. His fingers were rough and cold. He turned to the box, fitted the key into the lock, and opened it. The coins inside were few. A handful. The kind of sum that might feed a person for a few days and no more. The abbot watched him scoop the coins into his pocket, and there was no anger in his expression. No disappointment. Only a steady, patient warmth. Then he said, "When was the last time you ate?" The man did not answer. He stood with his back against the wall, clutching the coins, ready to run. "There is food in the kitchen," the abbot said. "Left from this morning's meal. Rice and vegetables. Simple food, but there is plenty. Please, help yourself. It will only go to waste otherwise." The man hesitated. He looked at the abbot, then at the open doorway behind him, then at the abbot again. Everything in his experience told him this was a trick. People did not behave this way. You do not offer supper to someone who is robbing you. But the abbot's face was impossible to argue with. There was no calculation in it. No strategy, just kindness, plain and unmistakable, like sunlight falling through a window. He went to the kitchen. He ate quickly, standing, his back against the wall, watching the doorway the whole time. The abbot came in after him and sat on a wooden bench nearby. He did not stare. He did not lecture. He simply sat, hands folded in his lap, as calm as if this were any other evening. As if sharing a midnight kitchen with a stranger were the most ordinary thing in the world. When the man had finished, he wiped his mouth with his sleeve and moved toward the door, the coins heavy in his pocket. He paused at the threshold. "Do not call anyone," he said. The abbot shook his head gently. "The coins are there for those who need them. You needed them. There is nothing to report." The man looked at him one more time, a long, confused look, and then disappeared into the darkness. The abbot stood at the doorway for a while, looking at the sky. Then he returned to his room and went back to sleep. Years passed, and the monastery continued its quiet life. The seasons turned. The abbot grew older. His hair turned white. His step slowed. But his kindness, if anything, deepened with age. He had seen enough of the world to know that most people are doing their best with what they have, and that the ones who seem hardest are often the ones carrying the most. This understanding did not make him naive. It made him patient. Then one evening, as the last light of the day turned the hills a deep amber and the first stars appeared above the tree line, a man appeared at the monastery gate. He was older now, his face lined by years of sun and weather, his hair beginning to grey at the temples. But there was something different about him, something that had not been there before. He carried himself quietly, without the hunted look he had once worn. His eyes were steady. He stood at the gate for a long time before he knocked, as if gathering the courage to walk through a door he had once run out of. He asked to see the abbot. A young monk who knew nothing of what had happened years ago in the shrine room led him through the grounds. They passed the meditation hall, where a few monks sat in the last of the daylight. They passed the garden, where rows of beans climbed their stakes in neat green lines. And they came to a small clearing where the abbot sat beneath an old tree, a cup of tea in his hands, watching the evening settle over the valley below. The man bowed. "You will not remember me," he said. The abbot looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Something shifted in his expression. A recognition, not of the face exactly, which had changed, but of something behind the face, something he had seen once before, years ago in a shrine room lit by moonlight. Then he smiled. "I remember," he said. "You came for the donation box." The man nodded. He lowered himself to the ground and sat across from the abbot. He was quiet for a while. When he spoke, his voice was careful, as if he were carrying something fragile that he did not want to break. "I have thought about that night many times," he said. "More times than I can count. For years, I could not understand why you helped me. I was taking from you, and you gave me more. I have turned it over and over in my mind, and for a long time, I thought you were foolish. A kind fool, but a fool." The abbot chuckled softly. "Many people do. But then something changed," the man continued. He was looking at his own hands now, rough and scarred from years of hard work. "I cannot tell you exactly when. It was not one moment. It was more like a season changing. Slowly, and then all at once. I began to see that what I took from you that night, the coins, they were spent within a week. They bought a little food, a place to sleep for a few days. And then they were gone, as if they had never existed. But the way you treated me, the kindness of it, that never went away, I have carried it with me every single day since. It changed something in me that the coins never could. He looked at the abbot with clear, open eyes. The first time I came here, I took the wrong thing, he said. I took the money. Tonight, I have come back to take the right thing. I want to learn what you know. I want to understand how a person can look at someone who is stealing from him and feel nothing but kindness. Because, whatever that is, it is worth more than anything I have ever held in my hands. The abbot regarded him quietly for a long time. The evening deepened around them. The sound of the river rose gently from the valley below. Then the abbot said, simply, "Sit down. There is no hurry. There has never been any hurry." And so the man sat. And the abbot began to teach him, not with lectures or doctrines, not with long lists of rules or complicated philosophy, but with simple words, the kind a person might use to explain something to a friend on a quiet evening. He spoke about the Buddha's teaching that generosity is the first step on the path to freedom, not the last step, not a reward for years of practice, the very first step. Because when we give freely, without counting the cost, without calculating what we will get in return, something inside us opens. A door that craving has kept shut for a very long time. And behind that door is a kind of peace that no amount of money can purchase and no thief can carry away. The coins meant nothing, the abbot said gently. They come and go. They always have and they always will. But kindness, once it enters a person's heart, takes root. It grows. It becomes part of who you are. You are sitting here because a seed was planted in you that night, and it has been growing ever since, even when you did not know it. Even when you thought you had forgotten. The man was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I wasted so many years." The abbot shook his head. "Nothing is wasted," he said. "Every step brought you here. Even the wrong ones. Especially the wrong ones. In the Buddhist path, we do not throw away our mistakes. We learn from them. They become the soil in which wisdom grows." This story, simple as it is, carries one of the deepest teachings in all of Buddhism. The Buddha often spoke about what he called the two kinds of treasure. The first is material treasure, the wealth of coins and goods and property. This treasure, he said, is vulnerable. It can be stolen. It can be lost in floods or fire. It wears out. It is always under threat, and the more of it we have, the more energy we spend guarding it. We build walls. We hire guards. We lie awake worrying. And slowly, without realizing it, we become servants to the very things we thought we owned. The second treasure is different. The Buddha called it the treasure of the heart. Generosity, kindness, patience, compassion, virtue, wisdom. These cannot be stolen. No flood can wash them away. No fire can burn them. They do not diminish when they are shared. In fact, the more we give of them, the more they grow. A kind act does not leave us with less kindness. It leaves us with more. That is the extraordinary mathematics of the heart, the only economy where spending makes you richer. Store up for yourselves the treasure that is not vulnerable, the Buddha said, the treasure that no thief can take. This teaching is not about giving away everything we own or about living in deprivation. It is about recognizing where the real value lies. It is about looking at our lives and asking, honestly, what am I building? Am I building something that makes me more generous, more open, more free? Or am I piling up things that will, sooner or later, become a weight I carry? The man in the story understood this in his bones. He had spent years taking whatever he could get his hands on, and none of it had stayed. None of it had warmed him. None of it had changed the shape of his life. But the one thing he could not forget, the one thing that followed him through the years and would not leave him alone, was not a thing at all. It was a gesture, an open hand where a closed fist should have been. A voice that said, help yourself, when every other voice in the world had said, get out. That is the treasure of the heart. And the remarkable thing about it is that it is available to every one of us, in every moment, regardless of how much or how little we carry in our pockets. There is a phrase that appears often in Buddhist teachings, and it is worth sitting with here. The rich are not those with many possessions. The rich are those with few wants. We have visited this idea already tonight, but here it takes on a new warmth. Because the man who returned to the monastery did not become rich by acquiring more. He became rich by wanting differently. He stopped reaching for things that emptied his hands and started reaching for qualities that filled his heart. And this shift, this turning, is available to anyone. It does not require a monastery or a teacher or years of study. It simply requires a moment of honesty, a moment of looking at what we are chasing and asking, with real gentleness, is this what I truly need? Or have I been running so hard towards something that I forgot to ask where it was taking me? The Buddha taught that this kind of honest seeing is itself a form of freedom. He called it yoniso manasikara, which means something close to wise attention or looking at things from the root. It is the practice of going beneath the surface of our wanting and asking what is really driving it. Often, what we find is not greed or selfishness. What we find is a wish to be safe, to be loved, to be at peace. And those wishes are beautiful. They are not the problem. The problem is only that we have been trying to fill them with things that cannot reach deep enough. In the Zen tradition, this is sometimes spoken of as learning to hold an empty bowl. The Buddhist monk's begging bowl is empty not because the monk has failed, but because the monk is ready to receive. An empty bowl is an open invitation. A full bowl has no room for anything new. And the beauty of the empty bowl is that it is already complete in its emptiness. It does not need to be filled to have meaning. Its meaning is its openness, its willingness to receive whatever comes. We can carry this image gently with us as we continue. The peace of wanting nothing is not about being empty in a painful way. It is about being open to what arrives without grasping for it, open to kindness, open to the simple, uncomplicated goodness that flows between people when they stop calculating and stop competing and simply offer what they have. The abbot knew this. He knew it so deeply that it had become as natural to him as breathing. And the man who came back, who sat beneath that tree in the fading light, he was just beginning to learn it. But beginning is everything. In the Buddhist tradition, the first step is always the most important one, because it is the one that turns you in the right direction. Everything after that is just walking. Take a moment here to rest. Whenever you are ready, we will continue together. Imagine walking through a very large house. Room after room after room. A hall with a high ceiling. A sitting room with furniture no one sits in. A second parlor. A third. Upstairs. Bedrooms that have not been slept in for months. Closets full of things that have been forgotten. Dust gathering on surfaces that were polished last week and will be polished again next week by hands that are paid to care about what the owner no longer notices. Now imagine stepping out of that house and walking a long way, up a hill, along a forest path, until you come to a small room. Perhaps it is part of a monastery. Perhaps it is a hut at the edge of a village. The room is barely 3 paces across. There is a mat on the floor for sleeping, a folded blanket, a broom leaning in the corner, a window open through which you can hear bird song and wind and the sound of water somewhere not far away. Which room has more space? It sounds like a trick question, but it is not. The large house has more floor, more walls, more square footage, as the builders would say. But the person living in the small room has something the owner of the large house has quietly lost. Time, stillness, the freedom that comes when there is nothing left to maintain, nothing left to clean, nothing left to worry about. In Buddhism, there is a word for this kind of freedom. It is called nekkhamma, and it is sometimes translated as renunciation, but that English word makes it sound harsh, as if something is being torn away. The Buddhist meaning is gentler than that. Nekkhamma is closer to the happiness of letting go. It is the relief that comes when you set down a heavy bag you have been carrying for so long that you forgot it was there. Not a loss, a lightening. Let us explore a story about a group of visitors who came to a monastery in the hills to spend an afternoon learning about the way the monks lived. It was a warm day. The visitors were mostly from the nearby town, ordinary people with busy lives, and they had come partly out of curiosity and partly because they thought it might be pleasant to walk through the monastery grounds and see the gardens. A young monk was given the task of showing them around. He led them through the meditation hall, where the floor was cool stone and the only decoration was a single statue, smooth with age. He showed them the kitchen, where large pots sat scrubbed and ready for the next morning's meal. He showed them the library, where old texts were stacked carefully on wooden shelves. And then, because they asked, he took them to see where the monks actually lived. The rooms were small. Each one was much the same. A sleeping mat rolled neatly against the wall. A cushion for meditation. Sometimes a book or two. Sometimes a small lamp. Nothing else. The rooms were clean and bare, and the afternoon light came through narrow windows and made long rectangles on the floor. The visitors peered in with a kind of polite fascination, the way people look at something foreign but not quite threatening. Some of them seemed to feel sorry for the monks. Surely this was a hard life. Surely they must miss the comforts of the world outside. One man shook his head and said, under his breath, "I could not live like this." But one woman among the group had a different reaction entirely. She stood in the doorway of one of these small rooms for a long time, not speaking, just looking. Her eyes moved slowly from the mat to the window to the broom to the patch of sunlight on the floor. And then she turned to the young monk with an expression that was half laughter and half longing. "Do you know," she said, "if my house were this small, I could have all my housework finished before breakfast. I would have the entire day to myself." The young monk smiled. He had heard this kind of remark before. People came expecting to feel pity and left feeling something closer to envy. Not envy of the poverty, certainly not that, but envy of the simplicity, envy of the clean floor and the open window and the hours stretching ahead with nothing urgent pulling at them. She went on, speaking more quietly now, almost to herself. I spend my weekends cleaning rooms no one uses, organizing shelves that will be cluttered again by Tuesday. And by the time I have finished, the weekend is over and I have not sat down once. I have not read a book. I have not looked at the sky. I have been busy, yes, but I have not been alive. It was an honest thing to say, and it hung in the air of that small, sunlit room. The other visitors were quiet. Perhaps some of them recognized themselves in her words. Because that is the hidden cost of a large life. Every room needs cleaning. Every object needs dusting, organizing, storing, replacing when it breaks. Every surface is a small obligation. And these obligations multiply quietly, like interest on a debt you did not know you had, until one day you look up and realize that most of your time is spent caring for things rather than caring for people, or for yourself, or for anything that will matter to you when you look back on your years and ask whether you spent them well. The Buddha noticed this over 2,000 years ago. When he left his life of luxury, the palace and the gardens and the fine robes, he did not leave because those things were evil. He left because he saw clearly that they were consuming him. They filled his days without filling his heart. And so he walked away, and what he found on the other side of all that abundance was not deprivation. It was space, room to breathe, room to think, room to sit beneath a tree and pay attention to the simple fact of being alive. He spent years experimenting with how little a person truly needs. And what he discovered, and what his followers have been rediscovering ever since, is that the answer is remarkably small. A place to sleep, a bowl for food, clothing enough to be warm, community, silence, and the willingness to be present. One of his monks described his own living situation in a way that has always been moving in its plainness. He said, I sleep at the foot of a tree. Everything I own I can carry. And I am the happiest man I know. This was not performance. It was not self-denial dressed up as virtue. It was a man who had discovered, through direct experience, that when you stop adding things to your life, what remains is not emptiness. It is freedom. There is something else that happens when people live in smaller spaces, something that goes beyond tidiness and free time. They learn to be with each other. Let us explore a story about two brothers who grew up sharing a single room in a small house at the edge of a village. The room was barely large enough for one bed, and they shared that too, sleeping head to foot, elbowing each other through the night, arguing about blankets in whispered voices so their parents would not hear. They were not always kind to each other. Brothers rarely are, especially when they are young, and the world feels too small, and someone else's knee is always in the wrong place. They squabbled over space, over who was breathing too loudly, over whose feet were cold and whose were taking up more than their fair share of the mattress. There were nights when one of them lay awake staring at the ceiling, jaw clenched, certain that his brother was being deliberately impossible. Their mother, when they complained, would say the same thing every time. You will thank each other one day. They did not believe her. They were sure that the only thing they would thank each other for was eventually moving out. But here is what happened over time, slowly, without either of them choosing it or even noticing. They learned each other, not in a grand, philosophical way, in a daily, physical, unavoidable way. The older brother learned that when his younger brother went quiet in the dark, it meant he was worried about something. Not sad, exactly. Worried. And without thinking about it, the older brother would shift closer and put a foot against his brother's leg, just to let him know someone was there. No words, just warmth. The younger brother learned that the older one talked in his sleep when he was happy, muttering nonsense about rivers and horses, and that the way to make him stop was to put a hand on his shoulder, gently, the way you calm a dreaming dog. And he learned that his brother's arm, thrown carelessly across him in the middle of the night, was not an invasion, but a kind of unconscious embrace that he would miss terribly when it was gone. By the time they were grown, they knew each other better than most people ever know anyone. Not because they had deep, meaningful conversations every night, though sometimes they did, lying in the dark, talking about nothing and everything, but because they had shared space so closely, for so long, that the boundary between them had softened. They had been forced, by sheer proximity, to develop patience, tolerance, and the kind of love that does not announce itself but simply shows up, night after night, making room. This is something we have largely lost in the modern world, where every child has their own room, their own screen, their own private kingdom. We gain privacy, yes, but we lose something harder to name. We lose the friction that teaches us how to live alongside another person. And without that friction, we arrive at adulthood not quite knowing how to share, how to compromise, how to lie next to someone in the dark and be comfortable with their imperfections, because we never practiced. In Buddhist monasteries, the monks have always understood this. They live in close quarters on purpose, not because they cannot afford more space, but because closeness is itself a teacher. When you cannot escape the person beside you, you must learn to accept them. And acceptance, the Buddha taught, is the first doorway to compassion. A monk once described his home to a visitor who had come to the monastery to learn about the contemplative life. His home was a cave in a hillside, small and round, barely tall enough to stand in and barely wide enough to lie down. The floor was packed earth. The ceiling was rough stone. In the rainy season, water seeped through the cracks and pooled in the corners, and the monk would lay strips of cloth along the edges to soak it up. The visitor looked at this cave with a kind of dismay. She had imagined something more like a cottage. A small cottage, certainly, but with walls and a proper roof and at least a door. This was just a hole in a hill. "How can you live here?" she asked. She did not mean it unkindly. She was simply trying to understand. The monk sat down on the ledge at the cave's mouth and looked out over the valley below. The trees were thick with leaves. A hawk circled slowly in the distance. He seemed genuinely happy, which made the question all the more puzzling. "When I wake up in the morning," he said, "I fold my blanket. That takes a few seconds. I sweep the floor. That takes a minute or two. And then I am finished. The whole day opens up in front of me. I can sit here and watch the light change on the hills. I can walk in the forest until the birds get used to me and land on the branches nearby. I can meditate for as long as I wish, with no one knocking on the door, no one asking me to fix the plumbing or mow the lawn. I have nothing to maintain, nowhere I need to be. And because of that, I have something that most people spend their whole lives working toward and never quite reach." "What is that?" she asked. He looked at her, and his expression was so simple and so content that it almost did not need words. "Time," he said, "and the peace that comes with it. Most people have filled their homes with things but emptied their days of freedom. They have so many possessions that they have no room left for living. I have done it the other way around. I have almost nothing, and so I have everything I need." The visitor was quiet after that. She looked at the cave again, and this time she did not see a small, damp hole in a hillside. She saw what the monk saw: a life stripped down to what actually matters. Not more possessions, but more presence. Not a bigger home, but a wider sky above it. Not more comfort, but more freedom. And she thought about her own house, with its many rooms and its long list of tasks, and for the first time, she wondered whether the walls she had built to keep the world out had also, somehow, kept her in. In the Zen tradition, there is a saying that goes, "The barn has burned down. Now I can see the moon." It sounds strange at first, unsettling even. A barn burning is a loss, and loss is not usually something to celebrate. But the Zen masters understood something about letting go that most of us learn only slowly, if we learn it at all. Sometimes the things we build around ourselves, the structures and the accumulations and the comforts we pile up year after year, become so tall that they block the view. We cannot see the sky because our own walls are in the way. We are so busy maintaining what we have that we forget to look up. And it is only when something falls away, when we release what we thought we needed, that we lift our eyes and find the moon has been there all along. Bright and whole and patient, waiting for us to notice. This does not mean we should abandon our homes or throw away everything we own. The Zen teachers were not asking anyone to burn down their barn. They were pointing, with a quiet humor that runs through so much of Zen, at something we already suspect but are afraid to say out loud. That many of the things we have gathered around us are not serving us anymore. They served us once, perhaps, or we thought they would. But now they sit in corners and closets and spare rooms, taking up space that could be filled with something more valuable. Space itself, stillness, the freedom to do nothing and to discover that nothing is enough. There is a beautiful line in one of the early Buddhist texts. Few are those among people who cross to the far shore. The rest merely run along the bank. Most of us, the Buddha was saying, spend our lives running along the bank of the river. We are busy. We are moving. We are doing everything we can think of to do. But we never quite get across. We never quite arrive at the place of peace, because we are too loaded down with things to swim. The peace of wanting nothing does not require a cave or a monastery or a room with nothing in it. It does not ask you to give up your home or your comfort or the things that bring you honest joy. It asks only this, that you pause now and then and look around at what you have built and ask with genuine kindness, is this making me more free? Or is this keeping me busy? And if the answer is the second one, even just for some of it, then perhaps there is a small letting go available to you. Not dramatic, not all at once, just a loosening, a setting down, a quiet decision to keep what matters and release what does not. And in that small release, you may find what the monk in the cave found, and what the woman in the doorway glimpsed, and what the brothers in the shared bed discovered, without ever putting it into words. that the richest life is not the fullest one. It is the one with the most room in it to breathe. Rest here for a moment. There is nowhere else you need to be. We will continue whenever you are ready. The Buddha once said something that surprised even his closest student. The student, who had been reflecting on the importance of good friendship, came to the Buddha and said, "It seems to me that having good companions is half of the spiritual life." The Buddha shook his head. "Do not say so," he replied. "Having good companions is not half of the spiritual life. It is the whole of it. The whole of it. Not a part, not a support. The whole thing." This is a remarkable statement from a teacher who also spoke so deeply about solitude and inner silence. And yet there is no contradiction, because the Buddha understood that we do not become wise alone. We do not become kind alone. We do not learn compassion in a vacuum. We learn it by living close to others, by rubbing up against their imperfections and our own, by showing up when it matters and discovering that showing up is, in fact, the whole point. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls Sangha. It is one of the three jewels of Buddhism, alongside the Buddha and the Dharma, and it is sometimes overlooked in favor of more solitary pursuits. But the Buddha placed it at the very center. Community, belonging, the web of care that forms between people who know each other well enough to stop pretending. Tonight, let us sit with this, with the quiet power of community and the surprising places where it grows. There is a story about an old woman who lived in a crowded quarter of a city. The buildings were tall and narrow, stacked close together, and the families who lived in them shared staircases and courtyards and the single well in the center of the lane. It was not a fashionable neighborhood. The roofs were patched. The walls needed paint. The hallways were dim and narrow, and in the mornings, you could hear your neighbors through the thin walls, waking up, arguing gently over breakfast, calling to their children. This woman lived alone. Her children had grown and moved to other parts of the city, and her husband had passed some years ago. She had a small apartment on the 4th floor, a few rooms, nothing remarkable. And every day, she would walk down the narrow staircase, past the other doors, to fetch water from the well and buy a little food from the vendors at the end of the lane. On the staircase, she met the same people. Every morning, every evening. At first, as newcomers do, people kept to themselves. A nod, a half smile, eyes down. But a staircase is a small place, and time is patient, and after months and then years of passing the same faces in the same narrow corridor, something happened that did not require anyone's permission. They began to talk. Not about anything important at first. The weather. A loose tile on the 3rd floor landing. Whether the vendor at the end of the lane was charging too much for his onions. Small things. The kind of things that would bore anyone who was not part of the conversation, but which, between neighbors, carry an invisible weight. Because small talk between people who see each other every day is not really small at all. It is the slow, steady building of trust. It is one person saying, without words, "I see you. I know you are here. You are not alone." The old woman knew everyone in the building. She knew which family had a new baby because she could hear the soft, determined crying through the wall at 3 in the morning, and she had left a pot of soup outside their door without being asked. She knew which neighbor was struggling with a sick grandparent because she had sat with him one afternoon on the stairs while he talked about it, and she had said very little, because sometimes saying little is the kindest thing. She knew who baked bread on Fridays, because the smell drifted through the whole building and made everything feel warmer. She knew who played the flute badly but earnestly on Sunday afternoons, and she had never once complained, because she understood that a person learning something new is a person still reaching for beauty, and that deserves patience. She was not a remarkable woman by any ordinary measure. She held no position. She had no influence. She had never done anything that would put her name in anyone's memory beyond this narrow lane. But she had done something else. She had been present, steadily, daily, without drama. She had been the kind of person who notices things, who remembers things, who knows that the family on the first floor leaves their shoes outside the door and the young couple on the third floor argue on Tuesdays and make up by Thursday, and that the quiet man at the end of the hall always eats alone and could do with a kind word now and then. She knew the sounds of the building so well that she could tell, from the quality of the silence on any given evening, whether things were well or whether something was quietly going wrong. And she cared. That was the simple, powerful thing about her. She cared. And then, one afternoon, something went wrong. She was coming down the staircase, carefully, one hand on the wall as she always did, because the steps were steep and worn smooth by generations of feet. And somewhere between the third floor and the second, her foot slipped. She fell. Not far, but hard enough. The pain came immediately, sharp and bright, and she could not stand. She lay on the landing, confused, breathing hard, trying to understand what had just happened to her body. Her ankle had twisted badly. She could feel it swelling already. For a moment, she was frightened. She was alone. The staircase was empty. She could hear the ordinary sounds of the building around her, a child laughing somewhere above, water running in a kitchen, the distant clatter of a pot. But no one was here. She called out, and her voice sounded smaller than she expected in the narrow space. What happened next is the part of the story that matters most. A door opened on the landing below. A young man appeared, a neighbor she had spoken to perhaps a dozen times, never about anything deeper than the weather. He saw her on the stairs, and his face changed immediately. He was beside her in a moment, his hand on her shoulder, his voice calm. "Do not try to move," he said. "I am here." Within minutes, another door opened. A woman from the second floor came out with a basin of clean water and a cloth. She knelt and began to carefully bathe the swelling ankle, speaking softly, telling the old woman that everything would be fine. A man from the floor above came down with a blanket. Someone else went running to find help. Another neighbor, who had heard the commotion from her kitchen, went upstairs to the old woman's apartment to turn off the stove, because she remembered that the old woman always cooked at this hour and there might be something on the fire. No one organized this. No one took charge. No one stood in the hallway and gave instructions. It simply happened, smoothly and naturally, as if these people had been rehearsing for this moment their whole lives. Each person saw what was needed and did it, without asking, without waiting to be told. The young man steadied her shoulders. The woman from the second floor cleaned the wound. The man with the blanket tucked it gently around her. Someone brought a cup of water. Someone else sat beside her and held her hand, saying nothing, just being there, because sometimes the most helpful thing a person can do is simply not leave. And in a sense, they had been rehearsing. Every morning on the staircase, every greeting at the well, every small conversation about onions and roof tiles and the vendor who charged too much, all of it had been quietly building something. Not a structure you could see, not something you could point to or put a name on, but a structure that held, absolutely and without question, the moment it was needed. Trust, familiarity, the knowledge that these are my people and they are mine, and when something goes wrong, we do not wait for someone else to come. We come. By the time help arrived from outside the building, the old woman was wrapped in a blanket. Her ankle was clean and bandaged as well as anyone could manage. Her stove had been turned off. Her door was locked. Her daughter had already been sent word, and a neighbor had brought down a cushion from her own apartment to place under the injured ankle. She was surrounded by people she had known for years, people who were not her family by blood but who were, in every way that mattered, her family by closeness, by daily presence, by the slow, patient accumulation of small kindnesses that had, without anyone planning it, become something much larger, something unshakable. This is what the Buddha meant by Sangha, not a formal organization, not a society with membership and rules, but the living, breathing web of care that forms between people who see each other regularly, who know each other's names and faces and rhythms, who have invested, even in the smallest ways, in each other's well-being. And what is remarkable about the old woman's neighborhood is that it was not a place most people would choose to live. The buildings were old. The stairs were steep. There was no space to speak of, no luxury, no privacy. And yet, because of that closeness, because people could not avoid each other even if they tried, something precious had grown there. Something that wealthier neighborhoods, with their high walls and wide gardens and gates that stay closed, often lack entirely. Connection. The simple, sturdy knowledge that someone will come if you call. That someone knows your name. That someone will notice if you have not been seen today. There is a teaching in Buddhism about the difference between wealth that isolates and wealth that connects. The Buddha observed that when people accumulate too many possessions, they often build walls around those possessions. First to protect them, then to protect themselves. And slowly, room by room, wall by wall, they seal themselves off from the very thing that would make them happy. Other people, community, the messy, imperfect, beautiful fact of living close to others and being known. The old woman's building had no walls between its people, only thin ones, and over time, even those had become porous. Sound traveled through, smells traveled through, laughter traveled through, and care traveled through, freely, in both directions, up and down the staircase, in and out of open doors, like water finding its level. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "We have more possibilities available in each moment than we realize." And one of those possibilities, available on every staircase and at every shared well, is the possibility of belonging, of becoming part of something that will hold you when you need it, not because you paid for it, not because you earned it, but because you showed up again and again with open hands, and in doing so, you wove yourself into the fabric. There is a deeper teaching here as well, one that connects to everything we have explored tonight. In the Buddhist tradition, there is a concept called karma, which is sometimes misunderstood as a kind of cosmic scoreboard, a tally of good deeds and bad deeds that will be settled in some distant future. But the Buddha's teaching on karma is simpler and more immediate than that. Karma means action. It means that what we do matters, right here, in this life, in this moment. The kindness we offer today does not disappear into nothing. It goes somewhere. It lands in someone's life and changes something, however small. And in time, it returns, not as a payment from some unseen judge, but as the natural fruit of what we have planted. There is a well-known Buddhist image for this. A farmer plants a mango seed. She does not plant it because she expects the tree to thank her. She does not hover over the soil demanding fruit. She simply plants. She waters. She waits. And in time, when the conditions are right, the tree grows and the mangoes come. They come not because the tree owes her anything, but because that is what mango seeds do when they are cared for. Kindness works the same way. The old woman on the staircase had been planting seeds for years. Every time she asked about a neighbor's child, every time she brought extra food to a family that was struggling, every time she remembered someone's name, or held a door, or carried a parcel up the stairs for someone whose hands were full, she was not keeping track. She was not expecting anything in return. She was simply being kind because kindness was her nature, and it had been her nature for so long that it no longer required effort. It was just what she did. But when she fell, the harvest came. Swiftly, warmly, and without hesitation. Because the people around her had been receiving her kindness for years, and it had taken root in them, and now it was flowering back toward her in the most natural way imaginable. This is the kind of security that no contract can offer. You cannot buy it. You cannot insure against its absence. The only way to have it is to build it, slowly, over time, by being the kind of person who shows up. Not grandly, not with fanfare, just consistently, just with warmth. A monk once put it this way: if you want to know what your future will look like, look at what you are doing right now. If you are planting kindness, you will harvest care. If you are planting indifference, you will harvest loneliness. It is not punishment. It is not reward. It is simply how the garden works. The Buddha said, "Whatever you treasure, that will be your measure." If we treasure material things, we will measure our lives in terms of what we own and what we might lose. And we will always feel uneasy, because material things can always be lost. But if we treasure connection, if we treasure the warm fact of being known and cared for, then our measure becomes something different. Something that lives not in a bank account or a property deed, but in the space between people, in the web of care, on the staircase. There is a story in the Buddhist tradition about a time when the Buddha was asked by a student what the single most important quality of a spiritual community was. The student expected him to say discipline, or meditation, or careful study of the sacred texts. The Buddha said, caring for the sick. Of all the things a community could do, the Buddha placed the simplest act of care at the very top. Not because caring for the sick is a spiritual achievement, but because it is the most honest expression of what it means to be together. It is the moment when pretense falls away, and what remains is just one person helping another, because that is what people do when they truly see each other. In Zen, there is no separation between the spiritual path and the ordinary life. Sweeping the floor is practice. Cooking rice is practice. Washing dishes is practice. And being a good neighbor, looking after the people around you, noticing when someone's light is off in the evening, remembering that the old woman on the 4th floor takes her walk at 3, and if she has not appeared by 4, then something might be wrong. That is practice too. Perhaps the most important practice of all. Because awakening, whatever else it may be, is not something that happens only in the silence of a meditation hall. It happens in the space between people, in the small moments of attention and care that we offer without thinking, without expecting anything, without even calling it kindness. We just do it. We show up. We ask how someone is. We carry the parcel. We turn off the stove. And in doing so, without grand gestures or spiritual ambitions, we become part of something larger than ourselves. We become Sangha. The peace of wanting nothing, which we have been exploring tonight, is not a solitary peace. It is not a peace that asks us to retreat from the world and sit alone with our contentment. It is a peace that grows between us, in the spaces we share, in the narrow staircases and the small conversations and the quiet acts of care that no one writes down but everyone, when it matters most, remembers. It is the peace of knowing that we are not alone, that we have never been alone, and that the door, somewhere on the staircase, has been left open for us. Rest here for a little while, if you would like. We will go on together when you are ready. We spend so much of our lives trying to arrange the future, choosing the right neighborhood, saving for the right retirement, building the right walls around the right life. And there is nothing wrong with this, nothing foolish about wanting stability and comfort. It is a deeply human instinct. But there is a teaching at the heart of Buddhism that asks us to look at this instinct honestly and to notice something we might prefer not to see. The teaching is called anicca. It is a Pali word, and it means impermanence. Everything changes. Everything passes. The weather, the economy, the body, the relationships we thought would last forever, the plans we thought were solid, the nations we thought were permanent. All of it is moving, always, whether we notice or not. The river flows, and nothing in it stays in the same place twice. This is not meant to frighten. The Buddha did not teach impermanence to make people anxious or to take away their hope. He taught it to make people free. Because when we see clearly that nothing is permanent, something inside us begins to relax. We stop gripping so tightly to the things we have. We stop building our happiness on foundations that were never meant to hold still. And we begin, gently, to look for a different kind of peace. Not the peace that depends on everything going right, but the peace that remains steady even when things go sideways, even when the plan falls apart, even when the world does something we did not expect. Every Buddhist teaching begins with this understanding. Impermanence is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be accepted, even embraced. Because once we accept it, once we truly let it in, we stop fighting reality and start working with it. And that, the Buddha taught, is where real wisdom begins. There is a story about a man who had done very well for himself. He was a merchant, clever and careful with his wealth, and by the time he reached middle age, he had more than enough to live on for the rest of his days. He could go anywhere. He could do anything. And what he wanted, more than anything, was safety. Peace. A place where nothing could go wrong. So he set about finding it. He was a thorough man, a man who believed in research and preparation. He visited the great library in the city where he lived and spent weeks there, arriving each morning when the doors opened and leaving only when the light grew too dim to read. He studied accounts written by travelers who had crossed oceans and returned with stories of distant lands. He consulted maps drawn by sailors, their ink faded and their edges soft with age. He compared climates. He weighed the risks of earthquakes, of floods, of political upheaval. He made lists. He crossed out possibilities one by one. He asked traders who had visited far corners of the world about the quietest, most forgotten, most undisturbed places they had seen. And after months of careful, patient research, he found what he was looking for. A small island, lush and green, far from any major trade route, far from any empire's ambition. The climate was mild year-round. The soil was rich enough to grow anything. The people who lived there were few in number and gentle in temperament. No army had ever troubled to go there. No kingdom had ever claimed it. It was, by every measure he could find, the safest, most peaceful, most perfectly sheltered place on earth. He sold his business. He said goodbye to his friends, who thought he was either brave or foolish, depending on how well they knew him. He packed what he could carry and boarded a ship, and after weeks at sea, the island appeared on the horizon, green and soft against the sky, exactly as the books had described. He built a modest house near the shore. He planted a garden. He learned the rhythms of the tides and the names of the birds that nested in the cliffs. In the evenings, he sat on the steps of his house and watched the sun go down over water, so still it looked like polished stone, and he felt something he had not felt in years. Perhaps something he had never felt at all. A deep, full, uncomplicated peace. For a few years he was right to feel it. The island was everything he had hoped for. Quiet, beautiful, safe. He slept more deeply than he had since childhood. He ate simply and well. He walked along the shore in the mornings and noticed things he had never had time to notice before. The way light moved through a wave just before it broke. The small crabs that appeared at low tide and vanished again, leaving patterns in the wet sand. He began to wonder why he had spent so many years accumulating wealth when this simple life on a quiet shore had been available all along. And then, as it always does, the world found him. It does not matter, for the purpose of this story, what form the trouble took. Perhaps it was conflict between rival powers that spilled onto his quiet shore. Perhaps it was a storm that no map could have predicted. Perhaps it was simply the turning of history, which has a way of reaching even the most remote and carefully chosen places. What matters is that the peace he had tried to buy, the safety he had tried to arrange, proved to be as temporary as everything else. He survived. He went on living. But something in his understanding shifted permanently. He had believed, with all the confidence of a well-researched plan, that safety was something you could find on a map. That if you chose the right place, the right investment, the right walls, you could hold the world at bay. And now he knew, with a certainty that no book could have given him, that you cannot. The Buddhist tradition does not teach this to make us feel helpless. It teaches it to redirect our energy. Because most of us spend enormous effort trying to secure a future that is, by its very nature, unsecurable. We save and invest and insure and plan, and all of these things have their place. But beneath them, if we are honest, there is often a quiet belief that if we just get the arrangements right, we will be safe forever. And that belief, however comforting, is not true. The Buddha compared this to building a house on a riverbank. The house may be beautiful, the foundation may be strong, but the river is always moving, and one day the bank will shift. This is not a fault of the builder. It is simply the nature of rivers. So what does the Buddhist path suggest instead? Not that we stop building, not that we stop planning or working or caring for our families and our futures, but that we hold our plans lightly, that we recognize them for what they are, our best guesses about a future we cannot see, and that we invest not only in the outer arrangements of our lives but in the inner ones, in the qualities of heart and mind that will still be with us when the outer arrangements change, as they inevitably will, in kindness, in patience, in the quiet strength that comes from having spent a lifetime caring about something larger than our own comfort. Because here is what the Buddhist tradition has noticed over and over, across centuries and cultures. The people who weather life's changes most gracefully are not the ones with the best plans. They are the ones with the deepest hearts. They are the ones who, when everything shifts, still have something to stand on. Not money, not property, not a well-researched island, but a quality of being that does not depend on circumstances, a peace that travels with them. Let us explore a story about a different kind of security altogether. There was a monk who had no possessions to speak of, no savings, no property, no retirement fund, no arrangements for the future at all, at least not the kind that would make sense to a financial planner. He wore the same robes every day. He ate what was offered. He slept where he was welcome. A visitor once asked him, with genuine concern, "What will happen to you when you are old? What if you become ill? Who will care for you? You have no savings. You have no family to fall back on. Does that not worry you?" The monk considered this for a moment. He seemed to take the question seriously, turning it over with the same attention he might give to a line of scripture. Then he said, "I have spent my life caring for others, teaching when I could, listening when that was what was needed, sitting with people in their grief without trying to fix it, being present for strangers when no one else was, giving whatever I had, which was usually just my time and my attention and my willingness to stay. And because of that, because of all those small, ordinary moments of care, I have never once worried about my future." The visitor frowned. "But that is not a plan," she said. "You cannot present kindness to a hospital and ask them to treat you." "No," the monk agreed, smiling. "But I can tell you that everywhere I have traveled, in every place I have lived, people have looked after me. Not because I asked, not because I am owed anything, but because I looked after them, and human beings remember that. When I fell ill some years ago, 3 families offered me a room before I had even asked. When I needed medicine, someone brought it. When I could not walk far, someone carried my bowl for me. None of this was arranged. None of it was planned. It simply happened because I had spent years planting seeds of kindness, and those seeds, as they always do, produced fruit." He paused, and then added, with a gentle and slightly playful expression, "Your investments in the marketplace may rise or fall. Your property may change in value overnight. Governments change. Economies shift. The world moves in ways none of us can predict. But the investment of kindness, well, that is the one account that has never failed anyone. It is the one fund that never loses its value. It is the one market that never crashes. There is a beautiful teaching in Buddhism about the difference between two kinds of confidence. The first is the confidence that comes from having arranged the world to our liking. The right job, the right savings, the right house in the right neighborhood. This confidence is real, but it is fragile because it depends entirely on things remaining as they are. And things do not remain as they are. They never have. The second kind of confidence is different. It comes not from having arranged the world, but from having cultivated something within ourselves that does not depend on the world's cooperation. The Buddha called this kind of confidence saddha, which is sometimes translated as faith, but it is not faith in the way we usually understand it. It is not blind belief. It is not hoping for the best. It is a deep, quiet trust, earned through lived experience, that goodness works, that kindness returns, that when we live well, when we treat others with care, when we practice generosity and patience and compassion day after day, something accumulates. Not in a bank account, not in a safe, but in the world around us, in the hearts of the people we have touched, in the fabric of our own character. And when the moment comes, when the plans fail, and the arrangements fall apart, and the island is no longer safe, that accumulation holds us. Quietly, firmly, without us even having to ask. This is not magic. It is not superstition. It is simply what happens when a person spends years putting goodness into the world. The goodness does not vanish. It takes root in the people around them. It becomes part of the invisible architecture of their life. And that architecture, unlike a house or an investment or a retirement plan, does not crumble when the ground shifts. Because it is not built on ground. It is built on something steadier, on the human capacity to remember kindness and to return it. The man on the island had planned for everything except the one thing that no plan can account for, the simple, irreducible uncertainty of being alive. He had tried to eliminate surprise, and surprise found him anyway. The monk with nothing had not planned at all in the conventional sense, but he had spent his life being kind in every direction, and because of that, wherever he went, he was held. Wherever he stayed, he was welcome. Whatever happened, he was not alone. In the Zen tradition, there is a simple exchange that captures this beautifully. A student asked a master, "How should I prepare for the future?" The master said, "Take care of this moment. The future will take care of itself." It sounds almost too simple, almost careless. But the more you sit with it, the more it opens up. Because most of our anxiety about the future is not actually about the future. It is about right now. It is about the feeling, in this present moment, of not having enough control, of not being safe enough, of not having done enough to guarantee that tomorrow will be gentle with us. And the Zen response is not to dismiss that feeling. It is to redirect it. Instead of pouring all of our energy into arranging a tomorrow we cannot see, what if we poured some of that energy into being fully, kindly, wisely present today? What if the best preparation for an uncertain future is not a better plan, but a warmer heart? What if the most useful thing we could do right now is not to worry, but to be kind to whoever is nearest, and trust that the ripples of that kindness will reach places we cannot yet imagine. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment." He said this not because the past and future do not matter, but because the present moment is the only place where goodness can actually be lived. It is the only place where kindness can be offered. It is the only place where peace can be found. And when we are fully here, fully awake to what is in front of us, the future has a way of arranging itself around our goodness. Not perfectly, not always painlessly, but in ways that remind us, again and again, that we were never as alone or as unprotected as we feared. The man on the island learned this the hard way. The monk learned it the gentle way. Both arrived at the same understanding. The only true safety is not a place on a map or a number in an account. It is a quality of the heart. And that quality, once cultivated, travels with you everywhere. Through every change, through every storm, through every turning of the world. Let yourself rest here for a moment. There is no hurry at all. Whenever you feel ready, we will continue. There is a Zen saying, "The best way to live is to be like water in a valley. It settles in the lowest place. It does not compete. And because it does not compete, no one can compete with it. Water does not seek attention. It does not climb to the highest point and announce itself. It flows downward, naturally, to wherever it is needed most. And in that flowing, in that willingness to be low and quiet and unremarkable, it becomes the most powerful thing in the landscape. It shapes mountains. It feeds forests. It sustains every living thing. And it does all of this without anyone praising it, without anyone knowing its name. There is a deep teaching here about the kind of life that actually works, the kind that brings peace rather than applause. And it runs against almost everything our world tells us to want. Let us explore a story about a young man who, in his early years, had the chance to spend an evening with one of the most celebrated poets of his time. This poet was famous. His words had traveled across borders. His name was spoken in cities he had never visited. People repeated his verses in marketplaces and carved them into walls. He was, by every outward measure, a success. He had achieved what most people who pick up a pen dream of: recognition, influence, a legacy that would outlive him. The young man had managed, through a series of fortunate connections, to arrange a visit. He traveled to the city where the poet was staying and was led, after some effort, to the poet's private rooms. He expected something grand. A salon full of admirers, perhaps. Tables scattered with manuscripts and maps. The hum of creative energy. What he found was a tired man sitting in a plain room, drinking tea alone. The poet looked up when the young man entered, and his expression was polite but weary. He had the look of someone who had been looked at too much. Not angry, not bitter, just worn, like cloth that has been washed too many times and has lost its original color. They sat together for a long while. The young man, nervous and eager, spoke about how much the poet's work had meant to him. The poet listened, nodded, thanked him. Then there was a silence, and into that silence the young man said something he had been thinking about for years. It must be wonderful to be so well known, to have your words matter to so many people. The poet set down his tea. He looked at the young man with an expression that was difficult to read. Part kindness, part exhaustion, part something else, something close to warning, as if he were about to say something he had said before but that no one had ever believed. "I will tell you what it is like," he said quietly. "It is like living inside a glass room. Everyone can see in. Everyone has an opinion about what you should write next, how you should live, what your words should mean. You cannot walk through a market without being stopped. You cannot eat a meal in peace. You cannot sit by a river and just be a man sitting by a river, because someone will always come and want something from you. Your words, your time, your attention, your approval, something." He was quiet for a moment, turning his cup slowly in his hands. "When I was unknown," he continued, "I was free. I could go anywhere and be nobody. I could sit in the corner of a tea house and listen to conversations for hours without anyone caring who I was. That is where the best poems came from, you know. From listening. From disappearing into a crowd and letting the world speak without knowing it was being heard. Now I am recognized everywhere, and I cannot hear anything anymore except the sound of my own name. People come up to me and recite my verses back to me, and I smile and thank them, but inside I am thinking, I wrote that poem, sitting alone by a window at 3 a.m, and it was the loneliness that made it beautiful. Now I cannot be alone, and the poems do not come the way they used to." He looked at the young man. "If you are thinking of seeking fame," he said, "let me save you some trouble. The freedom you are imagining does not exist. Fame does not give you freedom. It takes it away, one piece at a time, so gradually that you do not notice until it is gone." The young man did not know what to say. He had imagined fame as a kind of sunlight, warm and generous. He had not considered that sunlight, when it never stops shining, when there is no shade anywhere, becomes something closer to a burn. They talked for a while longer. The poet was kind. He was generous with his time, even though his time was the one thing he no longer had enough of. And when the young man left, walking through the quiet streets as evening fell, he carried with him a feeling he had not expected. Not admiration, not envy, but something quieter and more unsettling. A sense that the life he had been imagining, the life of recognition and applause, might not be the life he actually wanted. That perhaps the life he wanted was the one the poet had lost. The quiet one, the invisible one, the one where you could sit by a river and simply be. The Buddha spoke about this with his usual clarity. He listed 8 worldly concerns that trap the mind, 4 pairs that together form a kind of invisible cage. Gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disgrace, pleasure and pain. He called these the 8 worldly winds, and he said that most human beings spend their entire lives being blown back and forth between them, elated by praise one day, flattened by criticism the next, thrilled by success, hollowed out by failure, chasing recognition, dreading the moment it fades, running toward one end of the pair and fleeing from the other endlessly, like someone chasing their own shadow. And the heart, caught in this wind, never settles. It is always reacting, always adjusting, always looking outside itself for confirmation that it is allowed to be at rest. Am I doing well enough? Am I seen? Am I valued? These questions, asked in silence 100 times a day, are exhausting. And they are endless, because no amount of praise ever fully quiets them. The wind just changes direction. The Buddhist path invites something different. Not to suppress these feelings, because they are human and natural, and everyone has them, but to recognize them for what they are. Passing conditions. Not the sky itself, but clouds moving through it. Praise will come and it will go. Blame will come and it will go. Fame will rise and it will fade. And if we can learn to stand steady in the middle of these winds, not chasing the pleasant ones and not running from the painful ones, something remarkable opens up. A kind of calm that does not depend on what the world thinks of us. A freedom that most people never taste, because they are too busy performing their lives for an audience to actually live them for themselves. The poet in the story had tasted this freedom once, when he was unknown and invisible and perfectly at ease with both. And then he lost it, not because someone stole it from him, but because fame, by its nature, replaces anonymity with expectation. And expectation, the constant pressure of being watched and evaluated, is one of the heaviest things a person can carry. There is something beautifully freeing about a life that does not perform for an audience. A life that is the same in private as it is in public. A life where there is nothing to prove and no one to impress. In the Buddhist monastic tradition, monks and nuns wear the same robes every day. The same simple cloth, usually brown or ochre, draped and folded in the same way, whether they are meeting a president or planting seeds in the garden. There is no wardrobe to manage, no mirror to consult, no morning deliberation about what to put on. This might sound like a small thing, but anyone who has stood in front of a closet full of clothes and felt the quiet weight of choosing, not just what looks right, but what will make the right impression, will understand what a relief it is to step out of that entire process. Because every choice about appearance is, at some level, a performance. It is a choice about how we want to be seen. And that wanting to be seen, that constant performance of identity, takes more energy than we usually realize. It is a quiet, steady drain on our attention, our time, and our peace of mind. The monk in one robe has stepped out of that performance entirely. He does not dress for the audience. He does not adjust himself for the occasion. He meets the world the same way every day, and that sameness is not deprivation. It is liberation. It is the freedom of no longer caring what impression you make, because you have seen through the whole game of impressions and found it wanting. There is a monk who was known for wearing the same patched robe for decades. Someone once asked him, "Do you not want better clothes? Something warmer, something finer?" He looked down at his robe, worn soft by years of washing and sunlight, and smiled. "This cloth keeps me warm in the cold months. It serves as my blanket at night. When I spill my tea, the brown blends right in, and no one is the wiser. I do not have to decide what to wear in the morning, which gives me an extra few minutes for sitting quietly. And when I go to meet someone important, I wear this. When I go to sweep the path, I wear this. I am the same person in both places. I do not have to perform. That is freedom." There is one more thing worth sitting with as we approach the end of tonight's journey. Two things, in fact, that are connected. The first is about work. Most of us spend a large portion of our lives working, and for many of us, work is a source of stress. Not because the work itself is bad, but because we are doing it for the wrong reasons. We are working to pay for the big house we do not need. working to maintain a lifestyle that does not make us happy, working to impress people we do not particularly like. And because the goal is misaligned, the effort feels heavy. It drains us. It feels like something we have to get through in order to reach the good part of our lives, which is always somewhere in the future, on the other side of some finish line that keeps moving. But there is an old saying, sometimes attributed to a wise writer, that when a person's work is aligned with their deepest values, their vocation becomes their vacation. When we work not for money or status, but to be of genuine service, when our aim is kindness rather than accumulation, something changes in the quality of our effort. The stress does not disappear entirely, but it loses its edge. The work stops feeling like work and starts feeling like participation, like contribution, like being part of something worthwhile. And at the end of the day, instead of collapsing in exhaustion, we feel something closer to quiet satisfaction. Not because we achieved something impressive, but because we gave something real. This is what the Buddhist teaching on right livelihood points toward. Not that everyone should become a monk, or that earning a living is somehow beneath the spiritual life, but that how we work matters as much as what we do. That the spirit behind our labor shapes the labor itself, and that when our craving is aimed at peace and service, rather than wealth and recognition, even the simplest job can become a source of deep fulfillment. The second thing is about imagination. In our world, there is a popular idea that if we focus our thoughts strongly enough on what we want, the universe will deliver it. Picture the car. Imagine the house. Feel the wealth as if it were already in your hands, and it will come. This idea has sold a great many books and made some people very wealthy, which is, perhaps, the most honest thing you can say about it. There is something to this idea. The mind does shape experience. The Buddhist tradition has taught this for 25 centuries. All that we are arises with our thoughts, the Buddha said. With our thoughts, we make the world. This is not new. This is not a modern discovery. This is one of the oldest teachings in human history. But there is a crucial difference between the Buddhist understanding and the popular version. The popular version says, use your mind to get what you want. The Buddhist version asks, are you sure you want what you think you want? Because if the mind is truly that powerful, if our thoughts really do shape the world around us, then the question is not whether to use that power. It is where to aim it. And aiming it at a parking space, or a bigger salary, or a house with an extra bedroom, that is like using a river to fill a teacup. You have access to something vast and beautiful, and you are spending it on something small. What if, instead, we turn that same capacity towards something worth imagining? What if we sat quietly and pictured communities where people greeted each other by name? What if we imagined children growing up in homes where kindness was celebrated more than achievement? What if we imagined neighbors sharing meals instead of building higher walls? What if we imagined the person sitting next to us on a crowded bus being treated with the same respect we would show our closest friend? The world does not change because we wish hard enough. But it does change, slowly, when enough people begin to hold a different vision. When enough hearts turn toward kindness instead of accumulation. When enough minds stop imagining what they can get and start imagining what they can give. That is the real power of thought. Not to manifest a better parking space, but to imagine and then to live a better world. The Buddha taught that the mind is the most powerful force there is. And if that is true, and the evidence of 2,500 years of Buddhist practice suggests that it is, then we owe it to ourselves and to each other to use that power carefully, to aim it at things that matter, at peace, at generosity, at the kind of quiet, unhurried happiness that does not need a trophy or an audience or a bigger house, at the peace of wanting nothing. The celebrated poet knew this, somewhere inside himself, even if his fame had carried him too far from it to find his way back. The monk in the patched robe lived it every day, without effort, without performance, because he had never left it in the first place. And the young man who walked away from that evening in the poet's room, he was just beginning to understand that the life he wanted was not the life the world was selling. The life he wanted was simpler than that, quieter, kinder, and it was available to him right now, without waiting for anyone's recognition or applause. It had always been available. He had simply been looking in the wrong direction. Rest here, if you would like. We are almost home now. Whenever you feel ready, we will walk the last stretch together. There is a particular quality of silence that anyone who has ever meditated will recognize. It is not the absence of sound. Birds may be singing outside. A clock may be ticking somewhere in the house. The wind may be moving through leaves. The silence is not out there. It is in here. It is the moment when the mind, which has been running all day, commenting on everything, planning, remembering, worrying, finally begins to slow down. And in that slowing, something else becomes audible. Something that was there all along, underneath the noise, waiting. The Buddhist tradition has many names for this. The Zen teachers call it original mind. The Theravada tradition calls it the mind's natural radiance. But the name does not matter as much as the experience. And the experience, for anyone who has tasted it even briefly, is unmistakable. It is the feeling of coming home, not to a place, but to yourself. We have traveled a long way together tonight, through villages and valleys, through monasteries and market towns, through stories of farmers and merchants and poets and monks. And all of these stories, in their different ways, have been pointing toward the same quiet center, the place where craving stops and peace begins. The place the Buddha was pointing to when he said that the end of suffering is not a thing to be gained but a burden to be set down. Tonight, in this last stretch of our journey, let us go there together. In the Buddhist scriptures, there is a teaching in which the Buddha describes what it feels like when craving finally releases its grip. He does not describe fireworks or angels or blinding light. He describes something much simpler. He says it is like putting down a heavy load after a long journey, like coming in out of the rain, like recovering from a long illness and feeling, for the first time in months, the simple pleasure of being well. These are not dramatic images. They are ordinary. And that is exactly the point. The peace the Buddha is describing is not something exotic or far away. It is not reserved for saints and sages. It is the experience of relief, the experience of enough, the moment when the body softens, the mind stops reaching, and everything, just for a breath or two, is exactly as it should be. We have all felt this. After a long day, when you finally sit down and there is nothing left to do, after a difficult conversation that has been resolved and the tension in your chest releases, after a period of worry that turns out to have been unnecessary and you feel the weight lift These are small glimpses of what the Buddha was talking about. Small windows into a state of being that the Buddhist path exists to make available, not just in rare moments, but as a way of life. The Pali word for this state is nibbana, and we touched on it earlier tonight. But here, at the end of our journey, it is worth returning to, because nibbana is not what most people think it is. It is not a mystical realm. It is not a trance. It is not the annihilation of feeling or the end of all experience. It is simply the absence of craving. The mind, free of its habitual reaching, resting in its own natural clarity. Like a lake that has stopped being stirred. The water was always clear. It was only the stirring that made it cloudy. There is a practice in the Buddhist tradition that captures this beautifully, and it is not a technique so much as a gesture of the heart. A teacher once offered this instruction to his students. He said, "Sit quietly, and then say to yourself, gently, as if you were speaking to a dear friend, whoever I am, whatever I have done, the door of my heart is open to me. Not to someone else, to yourself." This is a radical thing to say. Most of us would find it easier to open our hearts to a stranger than to ourselves, because most of us have spent years at war with ourselves. We carry lists of our failures, our shortcomings, the things we said that we wish we could take back, the things we did not say that we wish we had. We carry regret in our pockets, reaching for it again and again, turning it over, reminding ourselves of its weight. And all of this carrying, all of this quiet self-punishment, is itself a form of craving. A craving to be different than we are. A craving to have been better, smarter, kinder, braver. A craving to go back and rewrite the story of our own lives. But the Buddhist path does not ask us to rewrite the past. It asks us to make peace with it, not to approve of everything we have done, but to stop using our mistakes as a locked gate between ourselves and our own hearts. And this is what the open door is about. It is the practice of saying, quietly, without drama, I know who I am. I know what I have done and what I have failed to do. I know the places where I fell short and the moments I wish had gone differently. And I am not going to use any of that as a reason to keep myself out of my own heart. The door is open. It has always been open. I am welcome here, just as I am, not as I wish I were, not as I think I should be, but as I actually, honestly, imperfectly am. This is not the same as saying everything is fine, or that our actions do not matter, or that we should not try to do better. Of course we should try. The entire Buddhist path is about growing in wisdom and compassion. But growth does not begin with self-rejection. Growth begins with self-acceptance, with the willingness to start from where we actually stand, rather than from where we wish we were standing. The Buddha taught this to a student who was consumed by guilt over past mistakes. The student came to him and said, "How can I be at peace when I have caused so much harm?" The Buddha replied, "A person who sees their own faults and resolves to do better is already on the path. The person who cannot forgive themselves is the one who stays stuck, not because their mistakes hold them, but because their refusal to let go of those mistakes holds them. Peace and war cannot exist in the same moment. You cannot fight yourself and be at rest at the same time. You cannot punish yourself into wholeness. The only way to wholeness is through acceptance, through the simple, difficult, beautiful act of letting yourself in. In Zen, they sometimes say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The actions do not change. The world does not change. What changes is the person moving through it. The war inside has ended, and with its ending, a gentleness arrives that touches everything. Not just meditation, not just sacred moments, but the chopping of wood, the carrying of water, the washing of dishes, the quiet texture of an ordinary day. Let us sit for a moment with what meditation actually is. Not as a technique, not as a self-improvement project, but as a homecoming. When you sit down to meditate, even for a few minutes, you are doing something that sounds simple but is actually quite countercultural. You are choosing to be still. In a world that is always asking you to move, to produce, to respond, to decide, to perform, you are choosing, deliberately and gently, to do nothing, to sit, to breathe, to let the world turn without your help for a little while. And in that nothing, if you are patient with it, something reveals itself. The mind will wander. It always does. It will think about what happened yesterday. It will plan tomorrow's meals. It will suddenly remember something embarrassing from 15 years ago that serves no purpose whatsoever. It will itch and fidget and produce 100 small urgencies that feel very important in the moment and will be completely forgotten within minutes. This is not failure. This is the mind doing what minds do. It is like a puppy that has been let off its leash for the first time. It runs everywhere. It investigates everything. It rolls in things it should not roll in. It has no interest whatsoever in sitting still. And here is where the Buddhist teaching becomes most gentle and most wise. Because the instruction is not to grab the puppy and force it to sit, not to scold it, not to punish yourself for having a restless mind. The instruction is simply to notice, to see the thought arise, to recognize it for what it is, a thought, nothing more, and to let it pass. Not to fight it, not to chase it, not to judge yourself for having it, just to let it come and let it go, and to return softly to the breath, again and again. Thought arises, you notice, you return. Thought arises, you notice, you return. It sounds tedious, and sometimes it is, but something happens in that return. Each time you come back to the breath, you are practicing something. You are practicing the art of not chasing, the art of letting go, the art of being here instead of somewhere else. And each time you do it, the muscle of attention grows a little stronger, and the grip of craving loosens a little more. The Buddha called this right effort, and it is one of the most beautiful teachings in all of Buddhism, because the effort involved is not the effort of striving. It is not gritting your teeth and trying harder. It is more like the effort of relaxing a clenched fist. You are not adding force. You are releasing it. You are giving your mind permission to stop working so hard. And when this kind of releasing deepens, when the mind begins to trust that it is safe to stop running, something happens that is difficult to put into words, but unmistakable when it arrives. Peace arrives, not from the outside, not as a reward for sitting still long enough, but from the inside, as if it had been waiting there all along, covered over by noise and worry and the endless machinery of wanting. And in that peace, even if it lasts only a few breaths, there is a taste of what the Buddha was pointing to, the peace of wanting nothing, not the emptiness of wanting nothing, the fullness of it, the completeness of a moment in which nothing is missing and nothing needs to change. There is a Zen story about a student who came to a master after many years of dedicated practice. He had sat for thousands of hours. He had studied the sutras until he could recite them from memory. He had followed every instruction he had been given, precisely, earnestly, completely. And yet he was not at peace. Something was still missing. Something was still out of reach. He knelt before the master and said, "I have been meditating for many years. I have read all the texts. I have practiced every technique I have been taught, and still I have not found peace. What am I doing wrong?" The master looked at him for a long time, not with disappointment, not with pity, with something closer to affection. Then he said, very simply, "You are looking for peace." The student blinked. He waited for more. An explanation, a correction, a new technique perhaps. But the master said nothing else. He simply sat there, breathing, calm, his hands resting in his lap, with the kind of stillness that fills a room the way warmth fills a room, without trying, without insisting, just present. The student sat with this for a long time. Minutes passed. The shadows on the wall shifted. Somewhere outside, a bird sang a short phrase and then stopped. And very gradually, so gradually that he could not say when it began, something in the student started to change. Not because he figured out the answer, but because he stopped trying to figure it out. He stopped reaching. He stopped searching. He stopped treating peace as a prize to be won. And in that stopping, in that quiet surrender of effort, peace arrived. Not from the outside, not as a reward. It simply uncovered itself, the way the bottom of a pond becomes visible when the mud settles and the water clears. It had been there the entire time. He had been standing in it, walking through it, sitting on top of it for years. He just could not see it because he was too busy looking for it. This is the deepest teaching in all of Buddhism, and it is so simple that the mind almost cannot accept it. We do not need to earn peace. We do not need to deserve it. We do not need to achieve a certain level of spiritual development or moral perfection before we are allowed to feel it. Peace is the natural state of the mind when craving stops. It is what is already here, underneath everything we have piled on top of it. And the entire Buddhist path, all the teachings and practices and stories and meditations and 2,500 years of accumulated wisdom exists for one purpose: to help us clear away what is covering it up, not to build something new, but to remove what is in the way. There is a phrase in the English language that holds an entire teaching inside it: to want for nothing. We usually hear this phrase in the context of wealth. A person who wants for nothing is a person who has everything they need. But the Buddhist meaning goes deeper, and it goes in a direction that wealth cannot follow. To want for nothing is not about having everything. It is about needing nothing more than what is already here. It is the moment when the reaching stops, and you realize, with a surprise so quiet it might bring tears to your eyes, that this moment, right now, with all its imperfection, with all its ordinariness, is complete. Nothing is missing. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be taken away. You are here. You are breathing, and that is enough. that has always been enough. You simply forgot. The Buddha tasted this under the Bodhi tree on the night of his awakening. But he also tasted it on ordinary afternoons, sitting with his students in a grove of trees, eating a simple meal of rice, walking barefoot through a forest after the rain. He tasted it because it was not a one-time achievement to be celebrated and then put on a shelf. It was a way of being that he returned to again and again, breath by breath, moment by moment, for the rest of his life. And he spent those remaining years inviting others to discover that the same possibility lives in them. It lives in you too, right now, in whatever room you are resting in whatever chair or bed or quiet corner you have found, in the sound of your own breathing and the simple fact of your own awareness. The peace of wanting nothing is not somewhere you need to travel to. It is not at the end of a long list of accomplishments or spiritual milestones. It is here, in the pause between one breath and the next. It is here, in the softness of a body that has been allowed to rest. It is here, in the silence that opens when the mind, just for a moment, stops reaching for the next thing and allows this thing, this moment, this breath, to be enough. And from this peace, something else grows naturally. Something the Buddhist tradition places at the very heart of the path. The Buddha taught that compassion is not something we have to manufacture. It is not a feeling we produce through effort or willpower. It is what happens, naturally and without force, when a peaceful heart looks out at the world. When we are at war with ourselves, we do not have much kindness to spare. We are too busy fighting our own battles, too busy judging ourselves, too busy trying to get somewhere that is not here. But when the war inside ends, when the heart softens and the grasping stops, we find that we have a surplus, not of things, but of care, of attention, of the simple, quiet wish for others to be happy. This is what the Buddhist tradition calls metta, or loving kindness. It is the natural overflow of a heart that has found peace, not a forced, performative love, but a genuine warmth that arises on its own when the obstacles are cleared away. The way water flows downhill when you remove the dam. The way light fills a room when you open the curtains. It does not need to be pushed. It just needs to be allowed. And this is why the Buddhist path does not end with meditation. It begins with it. We sit. We make peace with ourselves. We taste, even briefly, the freedom of wanting nothing. And then we stand up and walk back into the world, carrying that peace with us. Not as a private treasure to be guarded, but as something to be offered, through kindness, through patience, through the small, ordinary acts of care that we explored earlier tonight. The parcel carried up the stairs, the meal shared, the oven turned off, the door left open. The peace of wanting nothing is not a retreat from the world. It is the deepest possible engagement with it, because a person who is at peace can see clearly, can listen fully, can love without the distortion of craving or the noise of self-interest. And the world, which has always been thirsty for this kind of seeing and listening and loving, welcomes it. Quietly, gratefully. The Buddhist tradition calls this the union of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom sees things as they are, without the filters of craving and aversion. Compassion responds to what wisdom sees, with warmth and without hesitation. And together, woven into a single life, they create something rare and beautiful. A life that is not only peaceful, but generous. Not only free, but deeply, quietly useful. Not only content, but open, endlessly open, to the needs and the joys and the sorrows of the people around us. This is what the Buddha lived. This is what the monks and nuns who followed him have lived for 25 centuries. And this is what is being offered to you tonight. Not as a demand, not as a standard to be measured against, but as an invitation to rest, to breathe, to let go of whatever you have been carrying, and to discover in that letting go that you have everything you need. We have come a long way together, from a valley where a farmer stood beside his buffalo, content with what he had, through stories of merchants and poets and monks who each, in their own way, discovered what was truly worth wanting, through teachings on craving and contentment and the quiet beauty of a simple life. And now, here, at the very end, we arrive where all Buddhist journeys arrive. At the present moment, at this breath, at the quiet, unremarkable miracle of being alive, right now, in this body, in this place. The peace of wanting nothing is not a destination. It is not a place you reach after a long journey and then stay in forever. It is a homecoming that happens again and again, every time you remember to stop and notice that nothing is missing. Every time the mind releases its grip and the heart opens, and the world, which has been waiting so patiently for your attention, becomes beautiful again. You do not need to be perfect for this. You do not need to have your life arranged. You do not need to have meditated for decades or read all the right books or lived in a monastery. You only need to be willing for this one moment to stop reaching, to stop fixing, to stop wanting things to be different than they are, and to see what is here just as it is with kindness. The Buddha did this. The monks and nuns who followed him did this. And now, gently, in your own way, in your own time, you are invited to do the same. Rest here for as long as you need. There is nowhere to go, nothing to do, just this breath and this peace and the quiet knowledge that it was here all along. And so we arrive at the end of our journey together, or perhaps not the end, perhaps the beginning of something quieter. We have walked through valleys and along ancient coastlines. We have sat in small rooms and looked out over wide skies. We have listened to farmers and merchants and poets and monks, each of them discovering, in their own way and in their own time, a truth that the Buddhist tradition has been whispering for 25 centuries. That the richest life is not the fullest one. That the freest person is not the one with the most choices. And that the deepest peace is found not by adding to what we have, but by discovering that what we have, right now, in this breath, is already enough. These are not instructions to follow. They are invitations to remember. Because somewhere beneath the noise of daily life, beneath the lists and the plans, and the endless reaching for what comes next, you already know this. You have felt it. In a quiet morning when the house was still. In a conversation that needed no words. In a moment, just one moment, when the world stopped asking you for something, and you stopped asking the world, and what remained in that silence was not emptiness, but a deep, surprising fullness. That fullness is always here. It does not depend on your circumstances. It does not require a monastery or a mountain. It only asks that you pause, now and then, and let the reaching stop and notice what has been waiting for you all along. The old teachings say that the Buddha, on the night of his awakening, did not gain anything new. He simply saw at last what had always been true. And what was true for him is true for you. The peace is already here. It was never anywhere else. So carry this gently, if it serves you. Not as a belief to hold on to, but as a door that has been opened. Walk through it whenever you remember. And when you forget, as we all do, the door will still be there, patient and unhurried, whenever you are ready to return. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Midnight Monk.